Recording. Hi, everyone. My name is Johanna Björkell. I am a university teacher and a subject teacher in English, German, philosophy, and pedagogy. And I work at the Faculty of Education and Welfare Studies at Akademi University in Finland. And so one of my favorite topics is evaluation and assessment, and something that I've found that most teachers find a little bit challenging, and mostly due to the fact that the teachers themselves perhaps weren't that transparent with how they graded or why they graded. And so at the point where we become teachers ourselves, we may start to grade based on things that we perhaps shouldn't be grading on. And so this is my gift to you, if you can say that, where I'll take you through the workings of my crazy brain in terms of fair assessment. And so this video is going to be applicable to teachers at any level. Of course, you need to then adapt it to your own grade level. But we are talking from primary school 1 to 6, through lower secondary school 7 through 9, and upper secondary school, vocational, and matriculating people as well, but then also higher education. So universities of applied science and universities. So just keep your own age group and knowledge group in mind when listening to this and adapt it accordingly. So, what is fair assessment? Fair assessment could be said to be a few things, but basically it boils down to these following aspects. Are you basing your grading on clear criteria? Are you making sure that you're not biased in any way, and so that you're not measuring things that you're not supposed to be measuring? Are you very carefully considering whether some intersectionality is afoot, which means that you're not basing your grading on age, sex, gender orientation, whatever, in terms of ethnicity or linguistic backgrounds, anything like that, but that you're actually basing your grading on what the student knows and what they're supposed to know. And so in that sense, like, fair assessment means that you're trying to be as objective and at the same time as subjective as possible, that you're taking into consideration each student's propensity and each student's like possibility to do what it is that they're supposed to be doing. And so what is it that they're supposed to do? And am I grading that? Am I measuring that in some way? And a very Nordic concept of grading as well is that we don't learn for assessment, but we assess for learning, which means that the assessment is supposed to be a tool for both the student and the teacher in order to be able to say, where should we go next? So more kind of a feed forward thinking than feedback. So feedback means that as a student, they hand in something, I as a teacher do something to it, give it a grade, give it comments, and that's the end of the story. While feed forward then means that here comes whatever it is that I have the student do. As a teacher, I do something with it, and then the student can continue on with that. So more of process pedagogy or progress pedagogy than some kind of a swim or sink mentality where the student needs to perform and that's the end of the performance. Thank you very much. And let's slap a grade on that, which may haunt you for the rest of your life. And so fair grading, good people, very, very good things to know. So let's have a look at like what we're doing as teachers out there. And so like the reality is that there is privilege and that there is some students that have it more ready-made than others. So in one sense, like the norm in education is that we are teaching for someone who is exactly like the rest of the norm. Usually also to like an academic, like a child from an academic family, because those children have been taught how the culture works, how school works, how the language works, like from the start, which means that they're easily taught. And those are usually the students that belong to the norm then, that are standing on top of all of those boxes. While the person on that one box maybe someone that struggles with a learning barrier, a BAP, a barrier to learning or social participation. And then we can have a student who comes from a completely different culture, who doesn't know the language, who doesn't know the culture, who doesn't know how to be in school or how to act in school, and so forth. And we may, as teachers, feel like we can't even help this student in a sense. And so it ends up being on a, well, let's just ignore it until the problem kind of goes away. And I'm not saying that to be mean in any way, but just the fact that, yeah, reality has a tendency to look like this, and most often because we aren't problematizing the norm that we are in. And so equality then means, and teachers are usually in this category, like we feel as teachers that I need to help each student in my class in equal ways. So I can't spend more time with one student in the class. I can't spend more time on one student's assessment. I can't spend more time on one student's feedback. And whenever that keeps consistently happening, it is a sign for you as a teacher that, like, the assessment is showing you that you need to go back and look at your teaching. So instead of, in the sense, blaming the student for the fact that you keep on needing to work so much, or you keep on giving the same feedback over and over to the same student, like, you need to realize that it's not the student's fault. It is actually something that you as a teacher aren't doing, but also, of course, like, things happening for the child and around the child, or the youth or adult as well, in terms of university studies. And then we move on to, like, so equality is kind of what teachers usually think that they should do. But equity is more of what we're wanting. So if a student needs more support in the teaching, they're probably also going to need more support in terms of feed forward and feedback on what they're doing. Progress reports, formative evaluation, if you will. And so, like, it is okay that you give a child or a youth or an adult more in terms of, if they need more scaffolding and more support, see Gibbons any year, or Lightbound and Spada, like, in that sense, like, if they need more support, you are supposed to be able to give that. And it's still equity. It's not equal, but it's equity. And so realizing that you are allowed to do that, and it's actually good that you're doing that, is one step of the way. But then when we look at the justice part, then the justice part is realizing that there are systematic barriers to learning and achieving. And so, like, why not remove the fence altogether? And so remove the systemic barriers. And so whenever this happens in your class and you're thinking about evaluation and assessing of the students, like, having that mindset that, because some teachers say there's just so many things wrong with these whatever assignments that they are taking in. And so in that sense, just think that there must be something systematic going on here, or systemic, that I need to, as a teacher, like, I need to see my responsibility in actually removing the barriers. And this could be like having students read a book, and instead of having them always write a paper on that book, have them do an oral presentation, or have them do podcasts or a voice note to you as a teacher about the content. So not always evaluating based on the written word, but instead kind of giving differentiated ways of learning. And to that side, I put a bunch of different kind of terms and terminology that you might want to look up. So intersectionality, we talked about in the last slide. That is how different aspects converge and come together and creates barriers to learning in that sense. Social justice and linguistically and culturally responsive pedagogy. Big shout out to Holly 2018 on linguistically and culturally responsive teaching and learning book. and then equity, and look more into how to create that without having a bad conscience about it. And my general tip is, in the classroom, create less teacher-centered teaching time, or less activity where you as a teacher need to be online together with the whole group, because whenever you start to create less teacher-centered learning, at that point you free yourself up to actually build those more boxes for some students and fewer boxes for other students. But you can then supervise and guide instead of being the person who's all the time pushing that entire train of students in front of you in order to learn. But this is then like everything that goes on in your classroom. and it's not everything, but it's like part of it. And so I wanted to kind of bring your attention to the fact that like teaching is just as complex and difficult as being a lawyer or being a doctor. It's just that we rarely look at how complex it is. And when we start to diminish how complex it is, we stop paying attention to the details. So in order to be a fair assessor, you need to be aware of the fact that you have learning objectives. So that's either given in a core curriculum or in some other type of curriculum. You're probably going to have learning material. It can be like a book, it can be an online book, it can be like physical material, whatever it is. You can have, hopefully, that's also a question of privilege with both of these actually, so technology and media. And then some type of grading criteria. And when the grading criteria is explicit, it's going to look like a kind of a grading rubric. So a learning objective will look like this. After finishing the course or the subject or the grade year, the student should know blah, 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 something. But the grading criteria then says that, okay, so if our hypothetical learning goal is that the student should know how to ride a bike. That's our hypothetical learning goal. And then the grading criteria for that could be like that the student knows how to sit on a bike with someone holding it or with support wheels, or that it even knows how to ride 50 meters forward, knows how to brake, and then knows how to ride 100 and knows how to turn both directions, can ride slalom or something like that. So kind of it becomes more difficult. And that is the grading criteria to look at. And so some courses and some grades and some subjects will have these ready-made. So the student knows how to do this a little bit, or a little bit more, or a little bit better, or a little bit more advanced, or anything like that. And that means that those grading criteria are explicit. In the Finnish core curriculum for 1 through 9, also upper secondary, there's actually implicit grading criteria, because the entire core curriculum is set at the grade 8. So we have grading 4 through 10. And so if a learning goal then is set at the grade level 8, that sort of means that we're going to have to figure out what does this means then if the student will get a 10, because that means that from the learning goal, we're just going to have to make it a little bit more difficult. And then we'll find out about grade 10. And then we're going to have to make it a lot less involved. And then we'll have the first passing grade of 5. But that's implicit, because it really doesn't say it more than in one place. And hopefully, like in teaching education, students will find out that, okay, so this learning goal is set at grade level 8. I once asked a university teacher, like, what would his course objectives look like if he would like state them for a grade 1, which is the first passing grade, because in Finnish higher education, we have 1 through 5 as grades. And so he answered, that would be that the student was able to get to the lecture, was able to sit through it and roughly listen, and was able to hand in the final essay. That would be like the passing, but didn't quite understand, I think, didn't quite understand the topic. And so like grading criteria, they can be explicit or implicit. And if they are implicit, Or if you just have one, you just have like the kind of guidelines for how to give one grade. At that point, you as a teacher have to create the other ones, hopefully together with another team of teachers or the teachers in your school. And then that's called then creating a grading rubric, All right, but then you have time. And you have, for the student, you have time in class and you have time outside class. And in most practical senses, this means that how many hours in this subject are we going to sit together as teacher and student versus how many hours am I like intending for you to work at home. So in higher education, we have also in upper secondary in Finland, we have criteria on like how many hours does this entail, and that it also kind of includes work outside of the classroom. Not everyone has this, and some people have it even better than that and has that kind of also separated. Then you have a whole bunch of other legislation and documentation and directives to take into consideration. And I'm just going to show you like one Finnish lower secondary school, like the layout of what that looks like all of the documentation that you need to take into account as a single teacher. And then you have the space. Are you in a classroom? Are you in a seminar room? Can you go outside? What are they supposed to like? What does the school look like in comparison? What does your classroom look like? What can you do in terms of your subject in there? And like what other spaces also like in the community, locally, even internationally, what can you use in order to make your teaching better? And this all affects the grading. So hang on there with me. And then at the bottom, we have kind of the human factors in that sense. So we have the students, we have students with other languages or cultures. So the students on the one hand, like norm students, and I use that very critically. Then we have BAPS, so barriers to learning and social participation students. We have the teacher who also sometimes has BAPS or has another culture or language. And then we have other resource people. And these can be like the rest of the staff in school, teaching colleagues, but it can also be like the lady at the local store that you involve in an assignment that you're doing with your students when you're sending them to that store to find something out. So like all of these resources, you're supposed to keep online as a teacher the entire time. And the younger the kids are, the more involved you need to be sometimes, and sometimes it sort of depends on the subject as well. All right, so this is an example from Vasa Övningsskola, which is a practice school for teacher education here in Vasa, Finland. And if you're looking at this, like this is all of the different documents that one single teacher needs to keep online and knowledgeable about in terms of creating teaching. And so like, this is the national core curriculum. This is like other legislation that in turn kind of influences the national core curriculum, but also influences you directly. Then you have the school strategy. You have a guide for planning the academic year. You have a planning calendar. There's a support material. There are themes for the academic year, and then an extra focus that they had this year. And all of these, there's an equality plan, and there's an inclusion plan, which isn't shown here even. And then there's an ICT strategy and so forth. And so all of these are then the ICT parts. And the green ones then are different kind of learning materials. And then these are kind of general behavioral or class management or school management rules that you have in there. But if you just like glance at this, like realize that all teachers have seldom read all of them, or they read them one year but didn't read the updated version and so on. And so like this looks nice, because in theory, this is all the knowledge, apart from the subject knowledge and the pedagogical knowledge and the technical knowledge and the content knowledge that a teacher needs to have. But this all kind of rolls into the assessment and evaluation And I'll show you how. So this is one of my favorite pictures all time. So this is how I view teaching. Me as a teacher, I'm standing there by the door and going, hello and welcome all my dear students, come on in. The subject is learning how to ride a bike. And I'm going to show you how we're going to walk around this house. And then when you come back out, I'm going to be here and I'm going to test how well did you learn to ride a bike, because that can happen at different levels. And then you're done. So like the floor then is, where is the bar the lowest? So that would be like the first passing grade. So in the Finnish core curriculum, like the basic education, that would be like grade 5. So 4 is the fail grade and 5 is the first passing grade. At the university, this would be a 1. And so like the floor means like, okay, so what is the step that I need to get to in order to pass this course? While the roof is the grade 10 or 5, depending on your level. This could be then A. And so a lot of teachers also kind of do this, which means that, oh, it sort of depends on who's the smartest jumbo in here this year. Like next year, it could be someone else, but this year it's this highly achieving student who's doing like all kinds of stuff. And I'm going to get to this in a bit where I'm going to talk about like how not to compare students among themselves. Because if you take only one thing from this class, like that should be that you are not allowed to compare students among themselves anymore. No. And a lot of you have had teachers who did that, and you'll be very familiar with that. But the next time you hear a teacher say, oh, I'm just going to have to wait until everyone hands in everything until I can grade, that's going to have to tell you that that person is not doing fair assessment, because that means that they are comparing the students among themselves, because the fair assessor only compares students against the learning goals and the grading criteria. Those are the only things that a fair assessor and fair teacher grades against. So you're going to have to be like, have I heard myself say those things? Then you need to kind of step up your game. All right. So, but there's a lot of problems with this, my analogy, because where are all the other houses? So if this would be religion year 4, where is religion year 3? Where is religion year 5? Am I aware of those houses? Am I kind of, like safely shepherding my students from that previous course to the next course? Have I actually looked in the core curriculum? Like, let's say, for instance, a teacher in grade 7, like, has that teacher looked at the curriculum for grade 6 in that subject so that they are aware, or even the entire primary school sequence, to see, like, what does today's students know when they come to my course? So also very small windows, like the windows are kind of the opening up to the world. Like, are we involving that lady at the local supermarket? Are we involving an astrophysicist at an observatory? Are we asking a parent that knows something? Like, are we using the internet? Are we using influences from other places? Or are we just then using our book? So where are all the other houses? Where are the other grades? Where are the other subjects, and so forth? This should be a village and not only like this lone house on the prairie. So here comes the next house. This is the teacher who doesn't really like in terms of a primary school teacher, this would be the primary school teacher who doesn't like, for instance, one of the subjects and kind of glosses over it, or makes the students work too much on their own, or is very interested in this one thing, but isn't really interested in the other thing. So the entire kind of core curriculum house becomes like, it starts to lean. And here's my house. So these are my courses. Welcome to Sagrada Familia. This is the Antoni Gaudi's cathedral in Barcelona. It was built, the building was started in 1852 and it is still ongoing. This is the eager teacher who does like a million different things and becomes super involved and kind of inspired by things. But this is also what it feels like to a student to kind of come to that course. It feels like it's overwhelming, it's too much. like, what is everything? How do I know what's on the other side of this building? And just as a note for all the viewers out there, the facade on the other side of this cathedral looks entirely different from this one. The only thing that they have in common are the spires and the towers. So yes, this is entirely Björkell. So now my question to you is, what would your house look like? Because what your house looks like will depend, like, or assessment will look probably a lot like the rest of your house. So be aware of what your house looks like and try to actively work against that as well, depending on what your house looks like, of course. But then, fair grading, and now I'm going to have to consult my notes because I had some specific things that I wanted to tell you about this. And in terms of what fair grading is, we could say something about what unfair grading is. And this is what I wrote down in terms of that. It refers to grading practices that are not objective, equitable, or transparent. It includes any grading method that does not accurately assess a student's abilities, knowledge, or skills, and evaluates them for factors the grading criteria does not pertain to. And then here are some examples of what unfair grading can be. Inconsistent grading, and that means that if I was grading the same student and I gave that same assignment to another teacher and said, could you please grade this student too? Like, if the grading would be completely different, then there is something wrong with my grading practices. Then bias in grading. And these biases can be race, gender, religion, socioeconomic status, other demographics, and it can often be like unconscious or implicit, which sort of means that we're not aware of when we're doing that. So you need to learn more about culturally and linguistically responsive teaching. And then we may have our own like assumptions also, or ideas about what it is that a student is supposed to know. And whenever that student doesn't come up to that, we are going to perhaps, I'm just saying perhaps, be a little annoyed at that student. And so that is like, whenever you start getting annoyed with a student, you need to back off and kind of look in the mirror and see, okay, so why am I annoyed at this student? Because the student hasn't been bad. The student isn't annoying, but there's something happening in the learning that you as the adult and you as the responsible are in charge of and responsible of, which means that it's something in what you are doing that is in your control and that you can control and that you can try to change. So to look at that. And this can be shaped by like our backgrounds, our experiences, and our expectations. And also, like, we can have expectations of some types of students to like perform less. And remember that scientifically, like, having high expectations of our students is one of the like guiding principles in order to actually have them achieve more and actually do more. Then we have subjective grading. We rely on our personal assessment, our intuition, our opinion, rather than using like clear and set criteria for our grading. And this becomes like a matter of interpretation, and that is scary. And then lack of transparency. We don't really tell students why we're grading or how we're grading. So it took me a while, like in the beginning of my teaching career, it took me a while to realize that even though I had formulated very clear grading criteria, why wasn't I sharing those with my students when I gave the assignment? Because for years I didn't do that. And I was like, well, because when you give them a grade and the student goes, but why did I get that grade? And you then show them like the entire list of grading criteria that you have, and you show them points, you've given them more percentages or something. And all of a sudden they go, but if I would have seen this list, I could have known how to look for like that, since these are obviously your expectations. And so having those criteria, like just you having them is actually unfair assessment. So hand off the grading criteria. And also note to all educators out there, you need to have your assignments done. You need to have the assessment criteria for the assignments done before the course or the year starts. Because if you're going to do ad hoc planning or planning as you go, planning in the car on the way to work, then at that point, you're never, ever perhaps going to get into the even close to like fair assessment, because you just won't have the time. And so like part of being like a brainy educator, which I know that you are, is actually to make sure that you have the plan, at least a rough plan, at least rough like grading criteria, and to create systems that you can utilize from year to year so that you're not every year doing like the same things over and over. So before we move on, I thought that I'd say something about like how can unfair grading because sometimes it can feel like, oh, but this is just like what I'm doing. But this has implications for the students. And I wrote down a few. You're limiting their opportunities. Like in terms of this year, in terms of next year, in terms of their forever lives, like grades aren't everything. And in the Nordic countries, we're very particular with the fact that like grading isn't important. We're not learning for the grade. We're not assessing for the grade. But those grades do matter. Like they do matter in terms of when the student wants to kind of move on in their study. I realized that I am so far from being gender equal or in any sense, and I still am not, and I still have to work at it a lot of the time. And so for me, a lot of the times, whenever that's possible, I will print out student kind of assignments and look at them and then tape over the name of the student, so I won't know what gender they are, in order to kind of just basically look at the content and the grading criteria, and not at all on the kind of individual student. Has this student been like an active student or something like that? Stop it. No, grading criteria and the work. And then overall, this is like a very serious issue with like unfair grading, and it can lead to distrust of education. It can lead to distrust of you as a teacher. It can lead to a distrust of the world, the universe, the state, whatever it is. And we all know that those things can lead to a lot of different other negative things. So as teachers, we are in a position of power, and we need to use that power for good, not for evil. So those are then the kind of possible things that can go wrong. And then comparative grading, I forgot to mention. Don't compare your students amongst themselves anymore. Don't do it. Because realize how unfair that is. So let me tell you what happened in Finland at the point where the National Board of Education decided that, we'll now set the learning objectives at the grade level 8. So what happened was that every single student who was in that system at that time, everyone's grades sunk, because there had become this kind of elastic line around the learning objective, like, because it was fairly subjective, like how did you feel like this was like excellently done, the same learning objective was just partially done, and how like everyone got to decide on their own. But at the point where they go, nope, let's just nail that one to the wall, it's an 8. All of a sudden people realized that there had been some grade inflation. And so everyone's grade came falling down. And I remember like the biggest people that were in a crisis at that point were parents. They were going berserk. How can my like 10 student pupil, how do they have an 8 now? Oh, because we realized that we've been giving her too much of a good grade, or him too much of a good grade. And so now they're actually getting like a fair grade. And so that is what happens. So what happened next was that if we have kind of fixed grade 8, then realize that, so this year we have student A who's a professor. And then we're using that grading criteria, but we're kind of letting the best student dictate where the best grade is. So that means that a perfectly like 10 student 1 year would just get 9 because there was this one student who was such a professor that they got to decide where the roof of the house was. At the same time, at the lower level, then like that student, like this year we had a fairly good student, and so they got like the lowest grade, but next year, oh, that student was like even further down. And so like this created this rubber band effect around the grade 8, where kind of depending on the student group, the grades got to kind of fluctuate up and down. And I'm still saying no, because we need to kind of set like not only 8, but we need to set 10. And we need to set 5, and we need to, like in higher education, 1, 3, 5, or even all of the grades. Stockholm University did all of the grades for each of their courses. And I think they have like roughly 20,000 courses or something like that. So imagining that every course has 4 to 6 learning objectives, and then that every single one then gets a grading criteria for each of the 5 grades. So that is a lot. It's a lot of grading criteria, good people. But do not compare your students ever again. Like after you've watched this video, no comparing your students ever again. You compare their work, not the students, their work to the grading criteria that you have set before and that you've also given to the students before, like depending on their age, of course. But then let's look at the solutions. Like what can we then do? So having clear expectations and criteria for assessment. Yes, using rubrics. So rubrics are where you have like this matrix of like, so for grade 1, these are the aspects that we're looking at. And then for grade 1, that aspect looks like this. For 2, it looks like this. For 3, it looks like that. For 4, it looks like that. And for 5, it looks like that. Which means that whenever I sit there with the assignment and I go, okay, so grammar. Like how much am I looking at grammar in this essay? I can look and see that I've decided that grammar only accounts for 10% of the grade. Excellent. Okay, so what would I say? Would I say that the student's grammar is low, very uneven? I'm making stuff up now. But like what does that look like? Okay, so the student has then like a good grasp of grammar, but there are still a lot of inconsistencies. So perhaps that's the middle grade. And then the student has an excellent grasp of grammar. Fine, that's the highest grade. But like make it measurable. So realize now that what I was saying is still fairly like hard to measure. So make as much of it as you can kind of measurable. But rubrics, that's when you have like this kind of a table thing where you kind of look at, okay, so what is knowing this a little? What is it like knowing it a lot? And then planning and having everything available before the course or the subject starts. Like you need to do this and realize also that, yes, for me, like I show my students everything all at once, and that is highly overwhelming for students. And so that becomes also like something to take into account. But when they have everything in there, when all of the homeworks are in there already, like students that have BAPs, that have support networks, they can activate those. They can start working on assignments that they need more time for, et cetera, et cetera. So like planning and having everything available for students from the start of the course. You're going to do yourself a favor too when you stop doing that thing where you run around during the recess and try to kind of photocopy things or like share things online. And then no comparison based grading methods, and then recognizing the importance of individual circumstances. So remember that picture with those 4 green pictures at the baseball stadium. And so let's look at a course model now. All right, so if I would have 4 learning objectives, so the triangles are the learning objectives, I would need to think that, okay, so I create a module out of that learning. So for most teachers, and especially in the lower grades, like it's very easy to kind of go like, oh, but I can't do it like this. Like we're going to have to do a little here and a little there and a little here and a little there. Like across time in a sense. And yes, I get that. But still, if you don't follow up on, like, did you do all of the things that were in that module? So in here, like the green arrow is the time, but it could be that you kind of walk in and out. So you'll do a little bit of like module 1, dipping into module 2, dipping into module 3, going around and going back to module 1 and slowly kind of covering the ground of each module. But in your head, this needs to be clear, and hopefully also on paper, because otherwise you're not going to be able to assess fairly. And especially if you're too stuck on the learning material, which a lot of teachers are, like, I need to follow the book, I need to do all of the chapters in the book. Like, you're going to realize fairly soon that what do you then do when you don't have time to do all of the chapters in the book? And so then you need to be sure that you've covered the ground of the learning goal, rather than thinking that you need to cover the entire learning material, whatever that looks like. So the triangle is the learning objective. And then you have the module, and that's kind of the content. It's the assignments, it's the reading, it's the presenting, whatever it is that you're doing in order to try to learn that objective. And then that little page thingy, that means that you are assessing in some way. And so look at this now. And so a lot of teachers do this thing, and especially in lower grades, where they go the entire green arrow and only at the end have that big test. And that's swim or sink. It's not formative, it's summative assessment as well. So formative is when you're working with the process, and you're giving feed forward along that process in whatever learning is going on, while summative is kind of the end. So that's kind of going like, well, that's the grade, that's the end. And here then we have, so this is actually like a course model from online teaching, where those orange bits are supposed to be like teaching or guidance online. But I like to look at it like this. This is where you're doing teaching in whole class, and the rest of the time should be student-centered work, where you then free yourself in order to create justice and equity for your students, and help those that need more help, motivate those who need more motivating, giving more harder assignments to students who need more kind of challenge, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, and then at the end, there's perhaps like a big sort of assessment of something. You could do that. I myself try not to do that as much as possible. So there will be no kind of big ending thing, but you've actually done the big things along the way instead. All right, so constructive alignment, my favorite. And I'm sorry about the capital extra E there. It's not there on purpose in that sense. Biggs, 1996, constructive alignment. So whenever you as a teacher get a list of learning goals and learning objectives, they're going to look like they're all of equal size. Like, they're just going to all look like, okay. Like, and then as a teacher, you're going to start from the top of the list and you're going to go through them, and then somehow or other you didn't make it through. There was a Christmas party, there was like days out, there was the Corona pandemic, like whatever it is, you're not going to get through all of the learning goals, and then often like the last learning goals fall off. In Anglo-Saxon countries, they have end weight, which means that the most important things come last. In the Nordic countries, we have beginning weight, where the important things come first. So a Nordic teacher may kind of interpret that list as, oh, but the most important thing is there first. At least I got to that part. But you need to realize that they are not equal. Like that list in letters and words, it's not an equal list. Like, some of those things are going to weigh more. They're going to take more time in instruction or in execution or in assessing. And so whenever you look at that list with learning objectives, you need to start looking at them through the lens of your subject knowledge, your experience as a teacher as well, because this also comes with experience. But you need to look at it and go, adjective conjugation in German. That takes a lot of time. That's difficult. Like, we're going to have to perhaps like work, like last term, we worked a lot on that. And I noticed that that kind of ate up what we're supposed to be doing with, I don't know, words on foods, whatever. And so like this year, realized that that may be the most important learning objective. And so let's put an emphasis on that. And so learning goals as they appear look like that. Okay, so the long box is time. The shorter box is time per learning goal. So think back to that course model. And then you go, ooh, okay, so this is what it looks like. Like it's just an imaginary thing. Like it's a mirage in that sense. It looks like that, but it really isn't. And so then your teacher hunch or your subject knowledge goes like, no, so we're going to have to do that too first, because that's the most difficult one. And it takes most time. And I want to make sure that the students really know that, because the next course, the next house, that is very important that they know constructive. So socio-constructivism. And then you go, nope, we'll do that first. And then you kind of rummage around in your learning material and in your course plan and in everything and kind of go, my teacher knowledge tells me this. And so you do in the second line, then you actually put like half of the time on those things instead of roughly going a third and a third and a third. And then you go, okay, so I'm going to use half of the time for that. Then you realize that the third learning goal, it's important, but it's fairly easy and the students usually grasp it pretty quickly. And you've been overworking that one a little bit because, you know, students have gotten better in languages to some extent. But you want to take that first because it is important, but it just doesn't take as much time as a third. And so I'm going to put 20% of time on that one. And then you go to the last one and you go like, oh, but the first one, the one that kind of, according to the list, looked like the most important one, really isn't that important. It takes some time. So 30% I'll put on that and we'll put that last. And now realize that you are freeing yourself as a teacher when you're learning this, because at this point you can free yourself from the learning material and go, ooh, good go, learning material authors, like excellent. But I'm now realizing that I need more like assignments and I need more texts perhaps to read like on that second learning objective. So let's do it this way. And then you test it out and see like, what does it, because it may not work with your new group, but this is then the general thinking. Also look at there's a little bit of empty space in here, and these are called transfer times. So on purpose, put in transfer times for things that didn't go as planned, for Christmas parties, for Corona pandemics, whatever it is. Like put in some kind of in-between time as well, so that you don't take up the entire time, and to kind of be more flexible as well. Like, oh, you found an expert at something that you want to bring in and you want to open those windows of your house. So yes, build in transfer times. And then constructive alignment means that if your plan, your objectives look like this, your assessment needs to look like this as well. So if you spend half of the time learning this one thing, which is now objective 2, that we're spending half of the time learning, then half of that assessment, 50% of it, needs to come from that learning goal. And this is so much more rough than you think it is. Like, this sounds super easy. I'm so sorry. I feel like I'm sitting here going, you know, this is fairly easy and logical. Very hard to do, good people. You're going to notice this. However, this is the only way to make sure that you're actually teaching your students what they need to know, and that you're actually assessing them, and that you're assessing them for learning and not for the grade. All right, moving on. Or moving back in that sense. So if this is now what we know, and these are all the things that we need to take into account, what do we do then? I just wanted to kind of bring in, and this is a computer model to begin with. And so it's a Finnish model. So like if you Google on it, you're going to find more information if you Google in Finnish. Good luck with that. And so DeepL Translate, that's a good friend to have in need. But tähtimalli is the word for it in Finnish, and then star model. Oh, it's the Swedish one is wrong. It's supposed to be stjärnmodellen. But what this means is roughly this. when you plan your assignments, and now you're thinking like Björkell and you're going like, yes, okay, so I'm going to have all of my planning done. I'm going to have all of my assignments done. I'm going to have all homework done for the entire half year or period or whatever it is. And then I'm going to have like all of these documents and all of these things. And the point of the STAR model is you need to collect it all in one place. So the STAR in itself can be a learning platform. It can be Moodle, Canvas, Fronter, It's Learning, Shobi, the Seesaw, whatever you want to, like whatever. But the STAR is there. And then all of the things that you collected, you put on there. And the thinking is that the student shouldn't have to come to more than one place in order to find everything that they need. And so like from the STAR, you can link them off to however many programs and applications that you want to, or URL links to go off into like an open windows out into the world. However, they all need to be collected in one space. So that's the only learning on this slide. And then moving on. So think about what it is that you're then doing. Like that learning platform could be like substituted with your classroom. So what is it that you do in there? You hand out things as a teacher. The students hand in things. You communicate, hopefully not only one way, but you communicate. And then you as a teacher or peer evaluation, but someone evaluates. It's always the teacher, because in peer evaluation as well, you as a teacher still need to kind of keep an eye on that. And it depends on the maturity level of your group. And this then are just kind of different. So remember, I'm an ICT pedagogue, so I was a little bit lazy and I put this slide in here, but like, look at this, like all of the stuff down here is just kind of the different types of skills that you're actually planning on using, or that the students are then using in order to create things for you. So that's the thinking. And then the STAR model, what you're handing out, what you're taking in, what you're communicating, what you're evaluating. It should all be in the same place. So remember that the next time you have this, I don't know, like I used to have like A4s, 4 of them taped together in a long row. They had tea mug marks and cat paw prints on it, but it had every single student's name, and it had 18 different things that I was giving some kind of a point or grading or some feedback on. And then I listed them there. So like, but that now also needs to be in the same place. And it gives you freedom and it gives the students freedom. But here, your job as a teacher is to coordinate learning. Coordinate learning. In Swedish, it's called tillrättalägga lärande. You're supposed to like place it after one another in a correct way. So it is actually your task to build the house. So realize that the house is the learning objectives. The house is the learning objectives. So we are looking at religion in year 4. We're not looking at math in year 7. Like that's the learning goals. They kind of frame what it is that you're supposed to be doing. So those are the walls of your house. So if we go back to this image then, like what are the rooms of your house that we're going into, and how are we placing those together? And realize that whenever you do that thing that I described, where we take the green arrow and we kind of go into module 1 and down into module 2 and into module 3, and then we kind of go back and then, you know, slowly cover ground like that, it becomes hard for the students to see what you're doing. And you are heading into Björkell land and Sagrada Familia Cathedral in Barcelona. So stop doing that if you can and try to go, so this is what we're learning. And we're going to try to learn it and we're going to test it. And if you don't know it by like this chunk of time, like let's see if we have to bring some of module 1 into module 2 and module 3. But if we don't have to, then it's good here. But we can repeat a little. Remember the power of repetition in education for learning. But then here, you need to create a workload calculation. And most primary school teachers have never done this at all, or even thought about the thing. And that's fine, it's okay. And it's mostly because the teachers before you didn't open up about it either, if they did it. And what we see is kind of also what we do. So how many hours in class is this second grader supposed to work on math? You have that, like the nation gives you that number of hours. But do you have it like, as in, okay, so I have 18 hours during this fall to do maths. What am I going to do with those 18 hours? How have I divided them up? Like, am I actually working on learning goal 1 there? Or have I constructively aligned and realized, no, that comes later. I'll need to work on 2 first. And then how many hours of homework do you have them do? I just talked with a primary school teacher here in Finland, and they went like, so roughly estimate, I have a rule that says that I can't give them more than 2 pieces of homework per day. And I usually give them in the same subjects. And the subjects were math and Finnish. So for Swedish speaking Finns, Finnish. So that's the kind of other hard language that we need to learn. It's our second language. English is our third language. And so Finland is famous for not giving that much homework, especially in the basic education. And so, yeah, how many hours are you going to make them work on that subject at home? And if not, like, how are you guaranteeing that you're getting all of the learning objectives in there during those 18 hours of math that you have in there? So, and for yourself then, how much reading do they need to do? And you need to calculate this. Like, you can't just roughly throw in there like, oh, so for today, we're going to read 25 pages, like for an upper secondary school, or for a lower secondary school, you'll go, oh, so 5 pages. Have you sat down and thought about like, how long does that take an average norm student? How long does that take? And there are tables about this online to the nth degree. You just Google reading in grade 4 in your mother tongue. How long does it take to read 5 pages? I don't know, like, you figure it out with the Googling, but like, just Google it and you'll find someone has calculated like roughly how long does it take for a 4th grader to read 1 page of English. So like, how much reading? And this is why you need to plan on beforehand. So you know, like, how much is it? And then, so the reading in pages could also be words, but easier with pages. And how much speaking in minutes, how much speaking presenting minutes, how much creating in minutes, how much writing, just to kind of also roughly make sure that they're doing all of these different types of tasks throughout your course, subject, year, whatever it is. And then, what are the learning objectives and which ones take approximately how much time to cover for you as a teacher and them as students? Also keeping in mind like different cultural and linguistic backgrounds, and also BAPs, barriers to learning and social participation. And then standards-based assessment. That's what I'm talking about. Like, this is the highly academic correct term for this, like standards-based assessment. And so it sort of means that like, you base your grading off of standards instead of basing it off who handed in at the same time on who's better or worse. But instead you have standards, and then you grade the student work. No, I'm not grading the students, I'm grading the student work against those standards. And that makes it fair. This is the entire point of this video, good people. It's the entire point. It's the entire point. So this is kind of a very nice way. I love this image because it sort of goes like, how can you stop talking about like the grades? We're not learning for grades, good people. So stop acting out that stereotype as a teacher, because we do. Me too. I need to work on it all of the time. Instead, talk about advanced, proficient, developing, beginning, emerging. Oh, don't these sound nice instead of A, B, C, D, E? Because they actually say the same thing that Dweck 2012 talks about, like growth mindset. Whenever we spend time on working on something, we actually learn something. And the more time we spend, the more we learn. But if our mindset is such, fixed mindset, that we think that I have a fixed set of intelligence, I have a fixed set of knowledge in maths, then I will never get better because my mind is saying, nope, no use. Case closed. So these are ways of kind of breaking that up. And then I took that hypothetical learning goal of learning how to ride a bike. So this is my highly professional, personal kind of, all right, so what would I assess. So yeah, read, feast your eyes. So minus typos, you probably found it. That's basically like how to create a learning goal, because the learning goal is to ride a bike, but to now kind of split it up into, okay, so if I do this, what do I get? So like emerging would then be like a grade 1, advanced would be a grade 5. If we had 4 through or 5 through 10, like this could be 5 and 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, perhaps something like that. I'm just making general guesses now. But let's move into the house. So moving into the house, like this is always my kind of advice to teachers. Like if you have 8 learning goals, like find a layout of a house, like a floor plan of 8 rooms in a kitchen or 7 rooms in a kitchen. Like just Google floor plan, 7 rooms in a kitchen and print it out, or use it in I use this in PowerPoint. So like very easy. And then I place a learning objective in each of these rooms. So notice if this was the green arrow image, this would then be like module 1, module 2, module 3, module 4. And then I actually, and now I need to do, sorry, need to make it bigger for you. And so like, if I take this now and go, okay, so grade A, but let's place grade A there. Let's place grade B there. Let's place grade C there. And let's say that D and E are both on that wall. Let's say now that I'm standing here by this door and I'm saying, oh, dear students, welcome in here. In order to get a grade A in this, you need to kind of show me that you need to do this. So I could have a test where I could go from the beginning, like a diagnostic test to see what you know about this to begin with. And that would perhaps tell me that, well, some of the students are really here at grade A, they already know this. So they wouldn't even need to come in here. They could go on to the next learning objective. And if you've planned it all out and if you have it all on the internet somewhere on Moodle or somewhere else, like they can go and do that on their own until they need help and come and ask for it. But like you could have like a little bit of a diagnostic test and go like, oh, okay, so you're over here. So for you, like you need to kind of move beyond that. And whenever you feel comfortable with the stuff that happens here, try out the grade B assignments or tasks. And in that case, when you're kind of have tried that out, like you can go on here, but you may be happy with a grade here. And so let me know, or yeah, I'll test you when you come out here and then I'll kind of know what it is. And then you do the same thing for all of these and realize then that a student with BAPS could like have like their own IEP, and then the IEP could be here in the middle. Like what is the shortest way in doing the stuff that they need to do and then leave? And also being okay with students not getting the highest grade. Like I'm not here as a teacher to make sure that everyone gets a 5. No, I'm here to provide opportunities for learning, and the student gets to choose like, how much of an expert do I want to become? The invitation is always to be an expert, and I have high expectations, but like they get to decide, hey, in this course, it's just one course out of many. Am I willing to like do the work that is required of me? But this could give you kind of like ways to kind of work around these things, different knowledge levels, highly skilled or highly like accomplished students that needs challenge, they could go directly for grade A stuff. But if you're going to create teacher-led whole class teaching your entire career, then this is not what you're going to be able to do. So this is going to have to like involve ICT and media. My only comment on that is you can't make ICT and media a threshold problem, which means that if the student needs to learn how to ride a bike in here, like you can't really have them like create a blog about learning how to ride a bike And then you have a student who cannot or will not write that blog. You can't flunk them or give them a poorer grade, because if they know how to ride a bike, they can still know how to ride a bike. And so you need to kind of give alternative assessment ways or examination ways. So like, don't make ICT like a threshold issue, but ICT can be a part of each and every grade wall here, but just don't place it in the doorway. All right, and so then testing here or at each of these as well. And the more you can have like online, ready-made, and different varieties of things, like the better this testing will go, and the less you're going to have to do the testing out here by the door. All right, so I hope my house analogy becomes clear. All right, we are heading into the next thing. So what are then the common challenges? And again, I want to kind of confirm with my notes, because there are some challenging. You as a teacher need to overcome your personal biases. Sometimes we as teachers are just very comfortable with having the students in there that come from educated families, higher socioeconomic status, but not too high, because that becomes uncomfortable sometimes too. But like, we can have biases till kingdom come. So yes, and then the high expectations. So scientifically, yes, have high expectations. However, like, you can't hold those high expectations over their heads and shame them when they do not fulfill them. Because at that point, you need to look at, like, it's also partly like your responsibility, and it's also partly that their life, their circumstances can't cater to your high expectations right now. Like, keep your high expectations as in, I'm expecting this, but whatever you then get, no shaming, no projecting, no kind of going like, you disappointed me. Whenever you hear you yourself say that, like about a student, catch yourself. That's the mirror time to go like, how is that really? Or what is it in my, like, what is now my hurt? What is my issue? What is my bad? And then managing grade inflation and grade deflation. And that is when, like, the really good student gets to determine. So you need, and especially for students who are having, like, who are burning out, like we are having, like, basic education students burning out, like primary school students burning out. So, like, stop it, good people. So when you define, like, what is the highest grade, and you go, okay, so I have criteria for this. So whenever that student who would have only, like, gotten away with writing 2 pages, then writes 10 pages, like, the student who wrote 2 pages, good quality 2 pages, shouldn't be punished for that, because those both students are still worth the same grade. And check in with yourself how much you're thinking that that is not the case. And that is you going, whoop, like the roof is open and on fire. So no. What is the highest grade? What is the grade 5 in higher education? What is A? And then there's a ceiling on that. And so whenever someone overachieves, like, find out different ways of kind of, I don't know, like pouring that over into another assignment, or like having less of a, like make something up. You're all pedagogical geniuses. Go figure it out. Björkell can't help you now. But kind of put a lid on it and put lowest expectations. And so, like, at the point where someone goes, I can't get to it, then you know how you can help, instead of going, oh, let's just lower the bar. So whenever I hear teachers talking about, oh, let's just lower the bar. No lowering the bar. The bar is set before the thing. And then we kind of look at how many boxes do I then need to give to this student in order for that student to make it up where they need to be. And then addressing student concerns about the fairness of grading practices. I once remember at a university that I worked with, not this one, where I kind of asked, like, how come students didn't get much feedback? And the answer was because there's so many students in a class and time doesn't permit us to give feedback to every single student. And then I just went, but as a student, then do I have the right to ask? Like, because if I would want to know, like, what could I have done better, or what did I do good, or what did I do wrong? Like, could I ask you individually? And they said, yes, that is your right. And I go, right? Like, no one's ever talked about that here. Do we have that right? And the teacher went, yes. And I go, but what happens then if I were to come to you then and ask for an explanation about the grade? Would you consider me a difficult student? And they didn't even have to think about it and said, yes. So like there are these things that kind of go on, and these are our biases and stereotypes, and I'm not blaming that teacher in any way. They were telling the truth, which I'm very grateful for, because that gave insight into it as well, and which like my intuitive sense had been, because I had at points asked like, why did I get this grade, and kind of received like snippy answers, or kind of like stuff like that. And so yes, address student concerns as they should be addressed, like adults and human beings, and as entitled of their opinion, because they're part of this. And also, again, realize that you are in a power position and you need to use that power for good, not evil. So the common challenges are not having clear grading criteria and not having clear instructions, not giving timely feedback. As a language teacher now, if I gave you 10 words and said, okay, so this is a quiz, now you get to write those down. And then I take that piece of paper and I go into my room and they lie there for 2 weeks. And then I kind of go through them and then I give it back to you. And we go through the correct answers on the board or whatever. At that point, it's too late. Like the learning has passed, good people. Like the learning has passed. So the more in mechanical exercises like that, the more you can put them into apps and programs that will go, like write your answer. And then when they put the right answer, it actually tells you, ooh, yay, right answer. Then that, in Pavlovian terms and very behavioristic terms, it then gives you a little bit of a dopamine kick. You did it right. And so even like going fill out 10 words and then press submit, and then it tells you the right and wrong answers, even then the learning is a little bit too late. So, but whenever you can find a program or an app or something that kind of goes, what is the Swedish word for challenges? And at that point where I write utmaningar and it goes correct, then ding, my brain goes, and I get a dopamine kick, and that learning is there. And then, but what's the Swedish word for common? Ovanliga, which is completely wrong because that's uncommon. And then the program should go bling, wrong. It is actually vanliga. So even better when it tells you what the correct answer would be, because that is where the learning is. And so whenever you can also have that same program, be grading also and giving points, scoring on time or something like that, which means that the student may even want to redo the test at a later date. Human beings and as entitled of their opinion, because they're part of this. And also, again, realize that you are in a power position and you need to use that power for good, not evil. So the common challenges are not having clear grading criteria and not having clear instructions, not giving timely feedback. As a language teacher now, if I gave you 10 words and said, okay, so this is a quiz, now you get to write those down. And then I take that piece of paper and I go into my room and they lie there for 2 weeks. And then I kind of go through them and then I give it back to you. And we go through the correct answers on the board or whatever. At that point, it's too late. Like the learning has passed, good people. Like the learning has passed. So the more in mechanical exercises like that, the more you can put them into apps and programs that will go, like write your answer. And then when they put the right answer, it actually tells you, ooh, yay, right answer. Then that, in Pavlovian terms and very behavioristic terms, It then gives you a little bit of a dopamine kick. You did it right. And so even like going fill out 10 words and then press submit, and then it tells you the right and wrong answers, even then the learning is a little bit too late. So, but whenever you can find a program or an app or something that kind of goes, what is the Swedish word for challenges? And at that point where I write utmaningar and it goes correct, then ding, my brain goes, oh, and I get a dopamine kick, and that learning is there. And then, oh, but what's the Swedish word for common? Ovanliga, which is completely wrong because that's uncommon. And then the program should go, bling, wrong. It is actually vanliga. So even better when it tells you what the correct answer would be, because that is where the learning is. And so whenever you can also have that same program, like be like grading also and giving points, scoring on time or something like that, which means that the student may even want to redo the test at a later date. Yes, so this is where you use technology. Use feed forward, use progress learning. So like when they get feedback, it's actually feed forward. And so they use that feedback and makes corrections or changes or amends. So keep working on things instead of just going, whoop, that's the end of it. And then learn for learning and joy and not for grades. Be flexible in the grading, and notice when you have a lot of students that aren't performing, it's not the student's fault. It's not basically all your fault either, but it has more to do with your teaching or your organizing of the learning or like all the surrounding things. And you need to take a look at that. So stop projecting on the students whenever it's going wrong, and then just go, oh, but I have probably set it up to go like this for some reason. And then you kind of become a detective instead and try to figure out like, why is it then? And then listen to your students. All right, so here, the mechanics of fair grading. Learn how to construct a learning objective or a learning goal. I'm not doing that here, but at the end of this video, there is a link to kind of look at how to use Bloom's taxonomy for creating learning objectives and learning goals. Usually you'll have them through your university, through your school, through the core curriculum, etc. But what you mostly need to do is learn how to construct grading criteria for each learning goal. And remember, in Finland, grade 8, that's what they're set at. This is an excellent wheel that my course assistant Marta found for me. And so this actually has Bloom's taxonomy, and that goes from from remembering, that's like a low level form of knowledge, to understanding, a little higher, to applying that knowledge, to analyzing that knowledge, to evaluating that knowledge, to creating something. And so here you have the verbs that you use in your learning goals. And here you actually have the learning activities that could go together with these. I hope that you download this and do this yourself, or screenshot it, or whatever you do, but just do it. The link is down there. I should have put a QR code in, so sorry. And also a short link. I didn't do that either. I may add it here in the video. And this is then a ChatGPT generated scale where I go, please ChatGPT, tell me, like, how would you create a grading scale that would differentiate between like different levels of knowledge, regardless of what the learning outcome is. And so this was what ChatGPT spit out for me, which is very interesting. So that's for you to kind of look at later. And so this is a fail grade. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or then this is 10, 8 and 9, 6 and 7, 5, or no, 4 is up here because that's the fail grade up there. But yes. And now I wanted just to quickly jump you into one of my university courses. So this is a course for teachers. And so this is like based off of the learning goals and learning objectives. Here are the learning objectives. Identify, analyze, and discuss the complexity of the teacher's work, plan and evaluate lessons in accordance with the current Finnish national core curricula, and discuss transnational and national educational evaluation. And so going back here, I was going like, okay, so how do I actually like guarantee that the students who leave the course with a grade 1, just a passing grade, how do I guarantee that they get all of those 3 learning goals with them? And I figured out that I can best do that through reading and forcing them in a sense to read, and then create podcasts together with their peers in a group. In this particular course, I actually also experimented with them having peer assessment of each other's. So I actually created repetition where they were supposed to hear the thoughts that they had already produced themselves yet again, but from a different group, like what learning did the group of 3 to 4 people come up with to begin with, and then listen to what 3 to 4 other people had come up with while reading the same book or the same legislation. So this was kind of, and I estimated that like most of this time, like so 135 ECTS is 135 hours. And that includes like in the classroom and the student's own work. And so 50% of that, and I'm going to give you the hours just in a while, but this is like half of the course is in here. But in here, you could choose, like there are 2 pods in here, but you could choose to do 1 pod or 2 pods. And so in essence, like you didn't have to do all of the pods in order to get the 50% of the course in that sense. And then they were supposed to create like a yearly plan in 1 subject in basic education and Finnish basic education. So that could have been like arts, year 4. And then a medium-term plan, which is roughly 4 to 6 lessons in 1 kind of goal. And then I had 4 different tasks, while the 4th task was like create your own task. But so if you look at this, so 50% of the course is here. Another 30 means 80%. So here goes like this 80% thing. And then they could choose their own specialization, but you don't need 100% in order to get a 5. So 90% is a 5. So this was a 50% was a passing grade, and then 90% is a 5. And then they're like split in between there. Fairly common, look those up. But here I then had like 3 tasks that I had predefined that covered the 3 learning objectives. And then I had 1 task where they were able to kind of make up their own. So they could, in essence, do whatever they wanted to. And they only had to do like 1 and a maximum of 2 of these. And in reality, like they could in this course get away with only doing that 1 pod in here, which consisted of an entire book of about 300 pages, I think, which covers all of the 3 learning goals. Yay. So like I could make sure that someone who only did pod 1 here and didn't do any of the other tasks, but still just got a 1 in my course out of 5, that they had a rudimentary sense of all of the 3 learning goals in there. And I made sure of that also through the lectures. But then this, lectures, workshops were 12 hours. Total time, 135 hours minus the 12 hours for lectures, workshops. So if we go with the percentages, so 50%, 30%, and then 10% each for the rest of them, then for the pods, they had 61.5 hours. Here they had roughly then 37 hours for the medium-term plan, and then each of the individual tasks were 12.3 hours apiece. And so like, the reason for these were like the reading that I was mandating. Like I did a calculation based on how many pages that were, and then how many hours I estimated that like creating a pod, planning a pod, and actually recording the pod would take. And so like most universities have workload calculators. This is the University of Helsinki's. Akademi University has one too, but it's only in Swedish. And so like this one was available also in English. So notice when you open the calculator sheet, because it's like a spreadsheet, that it has 2 tabs. And so the first tab is in Finnish, but the second tab is in English. But this also had some really great information. So please visit that link. QR code is still missing. I'm adding that here. And then this is my favorite of all times, Ben Eggleston's grade calculator. And here you just add, and so this was an example student from that course that I just showed. And so like for the pods, they got a 3. For the 30% task, the annual plan, they got a 4. And then they did one of the 10%ers for a 5. That turned into a grade average of 3.2. And just as a note, also, I also had some smaller assignment for each lesson. And so that isn't calculated in the time here now. It was in my original work calculation sheet because I just did this in a rough manner for you. But you got a 0.1 bump for each of those passing assignments as well. And there were 7 of those because we met 8 times. And so some students like this student would probably have had like 6 of them. Most students had 6 out of 7 of the smaller assignments done. And so that would have meant like adding on the 0.6 to this, which would be 3.8. And this is rounded then up to a 4 out of 5. And so the grade calculator, I Google Ben Eggleston grade calculator every time. And I've been in here like 1,000 trillion times. But the conclusion being, like, fair assessment is a lot of work. Like, trust me when I say it is a lot of work, but it's worth it, because I still remember those days in my teaching career, and that's time for me also. I still remember in my teaching career when I was sitting there going like, oh, so what should this student get? And agonizing a lot about it. And the most difficult ones were, of course, the ones where I was struggling with, is this even a pass grade or not? And then I did something that my supervisor during my teaching certification and my teaching practice said. He said, stop finding half points for your students. You're not doing them a favor by saying that half an okay answer is an okay answer. So like, it's either right or it's wrong. He's perhaps more harsh about it than I am personally, because like for many years I've sat there finding the half points. But like when you have the grading criteria done and you can go like, the student needs to know 10 words or 2 words or 20 words or something, like when you have measurable learning objectives or learning goals, that is when you can kind of give yourself the day off, because the student didn't. But then you need to look at, okay, but why do I now have 10 students out of 20 who are not passing the mark? That means that something's wrong in my teaching or my approach or my attitude toward them or my relationship with the students, which is also a very kind of high importance factor. So like, create positive teacher-student relationships, and also note that you as a teacher are also in charge of creating positive student-to-student relationships so that they can talk amongst themselves as well. But being a fair assessor and fair grader and transparent about it and open about how you do it and why you do it, that is going to go far. And it's also going to be part of like diminishing racial and other types of discrimination as well, because at that point you can start to give a lot of boxes to those students that need them. And so, yeah, be a fair assessor, good people, and peace out.